Howdy folks. In one of our earlier videos, the one where we introduced the string functions, we completed steps 1 through 4, but we didn't do step 5, which involves writing a custom user form. And so that is going to be the topic of this video. This is meant to be a simple introduction to the concept of developing custom user forms in Visual Basic for use in Excel. Now, a custom user form is a way to present a set of options or prompt the user for inputs using what's sometimes called a dialog box. The technical term is a user form. And they involve ActiveX controls, buttons, text boxes, check boxes, option controls, and so forth. And they're actually very easy to use, and so we're going to get a brief introduction in this particular video. So, as you may recall, we are writing code associated with each of these buttons to take the input string, perform a set of operations, and generate some kind of output. For example, we have a uppercase, lowercase, reverse, and then we have this input box, which is similar to a message box, but it has a single text field where the user can enter some information. Now, suppose we wanted to have a form like this, but we want to be able to customize the set of controls, add some additional controls, and that's the circumstance we're looking at today. And so what we're going to do is we are going to develop, we're going to write a user form that launches when you click on the replace button, and it's going to prompt the user for a search string and a replace string, and then it will look through this input string in cell B4, and if it finds any of the words or text, the substring that we've defined, it'll replace it with the designated replacement string and then put the result right here. So it's kind of like a standard search and replace option. And then we're also going to add a little checkbox on that as well to ignore a case. So let's double click on this button right here to pop us over to the editor. Now, what's going to happen is when the user clicks on that replace button, we're going to launch a custom user form, but we haven't made the user form yet, so we need to do that next. So I'm going to go up here in the Project Explorer and click on an empty place in the window, and I'm going to select Insert User Form. So that's how you create a user form. Now, your user forms are then listed under this folder over here on the left, and you may have a lot of user forms. I've developed spreadsheets where I've had 10 or 15 custom user forms, just depending on the context. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rename that user form, because again, we only have one user form here, but if you have multiple user forms, you want the name associated with that to be indicative of its function or purpose. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to type frm replace. Okay, so that's the name of our user form. And you'll see the form appears over here on the right in a window, and we have a set of tools and a toolbox. This should look familiar to you. We'll get to that in a second, but another thing I want you to notice is the title bar up here. It says user form 1, and we just changed the name of the user form, but that's actually different. There's a field. If you look in the properties window, and by the way, I just toggled the properties window by turning this on over here. You can turn it off and then back on. But there's a caption property, which is basically the title up in the title bar. So I'm going to put something here like search and replace. Okay. And then now we're going to start designing our form. expand this window a little bit. And first of all, we want a label. I'm going to go right here and use this this big A here, turns on the label control. This is a control we haven't used yet in our exercises in Excel. It's just a text label, kind of like a text box in Excel. And I'm going to go change the caption to search string. Let's see, let's make that lowercase right there. Okay, so now this gives us a little label, or basically a text string that we're going to put in front of our text box. So now, just to the right of that, I'm going to use this text box control here. Now, we haven't used the text box control directly in Excel. I've never found a good use for that, because if you want to enter some information in Excel, why not just use a cell? But in a user form, you use a lot of text boxes, and that's basically just a simple field that the user can type information into. And so I'm going to name that txt search, and this is going to be the search string. And you'll notice I didn't name my label, and it's not a bad idea to name your labels. I mean, I could type it LBL search, but it's very rare that you would modify the properties of a label control. You can, however, I mean, under certain circumstances, you might want to change the caption for your label, which is the text. And in that case, it's going to be important that you name your label control with an appropriate name, using the LBL prefix and then a name. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Shift key, and I'm going to select these two controls, and I'm going to Control C, Control V, because I want to have a copy of those right here. And I'm going to change this one to replace string, and I'm going to change this to txt replace. Okay, and you notice in the background of this form layout, it's got these little dots. These are grid points that the different controls will snap to as you're dragging them and positioning them, which is kind of nice. It helps you line things up. Those grid points do not appear when you run your custom user form. So for example, I can go up here, and this little play button, which we've used to run a sub or resume control when we're paused, you can also use that to launch your custom user form. So it pops us over to Excel, and it shows us exactly what this is going to look like as we run it, and we can test our controls. And you can see our text box is pretty big. The font is kind of small, so we could make that just a little more narrow. That might be a little too narrow. Yeah, we'll leave it as that. But you can position those. You can also change the font. Over here in the properties window, you can tell it that you want a bigger font. Maybe you want a 10-point font instead of the default 8-point font, which is really small. And now let's give it a whirl. Whoops, let me see. I want to run that. Okay, so yeah, now we've got much bigger font there. So, all right, what next? We need to put in a checkbox. And so we're just going to drag a box right here, and yeah, let's put it over here. And I'm going to call this CHK ignore case, and then I'm going to change the caption to say ignore case, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But finally, we need an OK and a cancel button. So we're going to use the command button control, and we're going to drag a box here, and we're going to call this CMD OK, and change the caption to OK. And then I'm going to Control C. Let's see. Control C, Control V. No, it's not letting me do that. Let me see. There we go. So I just did a Control C, Control V to duplicate that, so that they'd start out at exactly the same size. And now I'm going to call this one CMD cancel, and then I'm going to change the caption property to cancel. All right, so that's how that works. And then I'm going to resize this window, and well, that looks pretty good. I think that's in pretty good shape. Now let's give it another test run here. Everything seems to be working. Now these buttons don't do anything because we haven't attached any code to them yet. But as you can see, let me close that window. Creating your user form is really easy. You just create the form and then just start putting controls on it. Same way we put embed controls into an Excel sheet, and we give them names. And but now we need to start programming some of these buttons. So you'll notice when we launch this control, if we click OK and cancel, nothing happens. I can always close it by clicking on the red X over here. So, but we want, when the user clicks on the cancel button, we want that to go away. Also, let's not forget, when the user clicks on this replace button, we want that form to launch. So let's go back into design mode, go back to our code. It's right down here. The way you launch a form is very easy. You type the name of the form, frm replace, dot show. There's a dot show method that basically makes that form appear. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to double click on the cancel button, and that's going to launch a window which represents the code associated explicitly with this custom user form. And once again, if you double click on the control, it brings up a sub that is executed when you click on that button. So I can say frm replace, again, the name of the form, dot hide. So to make a form appear, you do the form name dot show, and to make it go away, the form name dot hide. And now I'm going to copy that to the clipboard, and I'm going to double click on the OK button, and I'm going to have it, for now, do the same thing. Just close the window. We'll come back here in a second and program up some more functionality associated with that. But for now, let's just try this. So if we run that, cancel. Oh, let's go to Excel and launch it. So we click on that button, cancel, OK. So now this button launches our form. Both of these buttons close the form. And in general, all the cancel button should do is close the form by using the hide method. But the OK button, in most cases, at that point, you take the inputs and then you do something with it. Now, in some cases, you want to do a little bit of data validation. You use an if statement to test the inputs. So for example, in some cases, if the user leaves one or both of these fields blank, then you can't do anything. And so you would, before you, in the code for the OK button, before you issue the hide command, you could check the status of those fields, and if some critical information is missing, you could just put up a message box saying you need to fill in such and such field. Let me just demonstrate that. So let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that we don't want to allow the user to issue an empty search string. Probably wouldn't crash or do anything bad, but that's probably enough of an error that we want to notify the user for that. So let's go back over to the code, and then we'll say if txt search dot value equals an empty string, then message box, you need to enter a search string, and we'll give that a title. Let's see. Let's do a VB critical there, and then it should be VB OK only by default, which is what we want. And then the title would be error, and then we'll say exit sub, because we want to just abort, and then we'll do end if. So I mean, we could have also done, there's another way we could do this. We could have said, instead of doing an exit sub and an end if, we could say else, and then we could jump down to this part and do our code that would be executed under a normal circumstance where that field was not empty. So let's do it that way. All right, so let's save our changes and go back to Excel. And if we're going to leave this blank, we can put something in here. We'll click OK, and it says, error, you need to enter a search string. And so once we put something in, then it goes away. So we've done a little bit of input validation. We've forced the user to not leave the search string blank. Now we're ready to do a search and replace, and we're going to forget about the ignore case checkbox for a minute, and we're just going to we're going to take the value entered here and look through our input string in cell B4 and replace it with whatever is entered in this replace string. And so here we go. We can actually do that very easily. We can say range B6 equals replace. We're going to use the replace string function, which, as you may recall, this is our Excel VBA primer. You give it a string, and then you tell it what to find and what to replace it with. And so it has three primary arguments: the expression, what you're supposed to find, and what you're supposed to replace it with. So that's pretty easy. So what we're going to find is whatever's listed in cell B4. Okay, and we're going to do txt search and then replace it with txt replace. Now I'm typing the names of those controls, but what I'm really doing is what I really mean by this is txt search.value. Remember that every object has a default property, and with the text box, its default property is a value property. So you can either type txt search.value or just txt search, and it means the same. It's kind of like when I say range B4 instead of range B4.value. If you don't explicitly name a property, it assumes you're talking about typically the value property. So this should work. Let's give it a shot. Let's go back to Excel, and let's say we're going to type world and replace it with I don't know, village. Let's try that. And look at that, it worked. So it found every instance of world and replaced it. I can go, let's try something else. And you notice when you bring your user form back up, it remembers what you entered the previous time, which can be kind of handy. So what if I want to replace lowercase o with uppercase O? Let's give that a shot. Whoops, uppercase O. There we go. Good morning, world. Or if you want to get rid of something, you can say every time you find an O, replace it with an empty string, and it looks like that. So it's kind of like the remove function we talked about before. All right, so let's go to the last step, and let's see if the ignore case toggle. Let's check out the ignore case toggle. For example, Right now, if I typed search string good and replaced it with happy, it's not going to work because this is all lowercase and this has an uppercase character. The search function is case sensitive, and so you have to remember that, and it's only going to find something that matches the case. So if the purpose of this ignore case toggle is when you turn that on, it should replace it regardless of the capitalization. And so to do that, let's go back to our code and say if chk, well, let's do something else. We need to declare a variable. Well, we'll do that inside the if statement. So we'll do if chk ignore case. I think that's what we called it. Let me double check here. Now, if I want to go back, if I'm looking at the code and I want to go back to the actual form, you use this button up here, and that brings it up. And we called that, yeah, chk ignore case. That's right. Now, if I want to go back to the code, I click on this button, pops me back to the code. And let's see, I don't want to do the click button for that. If chk ignore case, then I'm going to declare a variable here. Actually, let's do it right up here. I need something to hold that txt search.value content. So I'm going to say dim search str as string, and I'm going to say search str equals txt search dot value, and then down here I'm going to put that variable in there. And the reason I'm doing that is because if we need to ignore case, I actually need to do this for other things, for something else. I'm going to say dim input str as string, and then I'm going to say input str equals range b4, and then down here I'm going to replace this with input str. In other words, instead of operating directly on these on range b4 and txt search.value, I'm storing them into a couple of variables because we need to do some manipulation with that. So if we want to ignore case, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little trick. We're going to say search str equals u, let's see, L case, search str. In other words, we're going to convert it to lowercase, and we're going to convert our input string to lowercase. So that is not the most robust way to ignore case, but it's a quick and dirty way to do it. The point of this exercise is not necessarily or to present a really sophisticated way to do string manipulation. Rather, we're learning about custom user forms. So this quick and dirty method will work. And then we'll do end if. So what that means then is if we're ignoring case, we're just going to convert everything to lowercase, the search string and the input string. We don't need to modify the replace string. And then that's what we're going to pass into this function. And yeah, let's give it a shot now. So now if we say, if we have, I'm going to title case this up here just to make it more interesting. Good morning world. And I'm going to type, now if I say world and replace it with village, and nothing happens. There's no change made to that. But if I tell it to ignore case, now the reason it didn't do anything before is because this is capitalized and this is not. But if I tell it to ignore case, then it should work. Now an unfortunate side effect is that lowercase is everything, but at least it did the search and replace while ignoring the case. And again, the main thing is we are using that checkbox with an if statement and then changing how we process the results based on that. Again, the logic here is pretty similar to when you're using these ActiveX controls directly on an Excel sheet, but the only difference is we're doing it directly associated with this custom user form. And just to review, when we create a string to launch, or a custom user form, to launch the form we use the show method, and then to close it we use the hide method. Typically the cancel button does nothing but hide the form, and the OK button also hides the form usually, but then it takes the inputs you provided and then does some sort of operation. That's kind of the standard usage of a custom user form in Excel. And so, yeah, custom user forms are great. They're very easy to use, and it's easy to overuse them, but there definitely are cases when you can add some powerful functionality to your spreadsheet by adding one or more custom user forms. So that concludes our little introduction to custom user forms.